Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles as we search the Scriptures for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
We're studying this morning in the book of John, chapter 9, verse 1. At the closing part of the 8th chapter, as Jesus had been interacting with the religious leaders, he had tried to show them that through the miracles and all that was going on, that God was with him. He had interacted with them on several occasions, but he was not accomplishing much. And of course, when push come to shove and he really revealed himself for who he was, the God of Moses, the one who spoke with Moses. In Exodus 3:14, they took up stones to stone him. And so we're told in the latter part there that he went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. And so, not being the appropriate time, this would have been a perfect time for Jesus to have been arrested and the crucifixion and all those things to have had started, but the time was not yet come. We know that the crucifixion and things of that would take place during the Passover. And so Jesus left, but that doesn't mean that the controversy left with him. And so as we come into the 9th chapter this morning, it says, "And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" As Jesus is leaving and going with his disciples, we're told that they passed by an individual who was blind from birth. And so the question that many times comes up when we have situations and circumstances like this is always the question, why? Why was this man born blind? Why is this child born with a heart disease? Why is this person this way? And so many times that question comes up, and we always expect that somebody did something. When we don't understand something as well as we should, then we have to blame somebody. It just seems like if we can't get a good answer, if we can blame somebody, then that fixes it. We don't know why, he was born blind, but, if we can blame his parents, his mother, his father, if we can find something to lay that blame on, somehow we'll be satisfied with his blindness. Now, answering that question in and of itself doesn't really fix anything, does it? When we ask questions like, why was this man born blind? And even if we had a good answer for it, that really doesn't change the fact that he's blind. If someone is born with a birth defect of any kind, understanding why doesn't change the defect. And of course, it can also bring problems. Many mothers over the years have suffered because they come to find out that some medications that have been given to them while they were pregnant have caused some type of birth defect. And of course, they feel guilty about it, but it's not something that they personally made the decision for, and they can't really do anything about it. And so, knowing that, well, that was that pill you took when you were pregnant for morning sickness, or it's a pill you took for this or that you took for that, that's why your child was born without arms. Well, that doesn't really fix things. It makes it worse because, there's the guilt. And so we always want some kind of explanation for these things. We have our idea of what is whole and complete. When a child's born, we want to know how many fingers and toes they have. We want to hear them cry. We want to know that their lungs are good. You just want to know, is everything okay? That's one of the first things. Knowing that things can go wrong. Everybody wants to know, is she okay? Is he okay? They want to know that. And if they're not, then they want to blame somebody. And so that's nothing new. And so the disciples, as they passed by and as Jesus beheld the man and as he looked upon him, his disciples see Jesus' interest in this individual. And so they asked the question, who sinned that this man should be born blind? Was it his parents? What happened? And so with that, Jesus takes the advantage to introduce what we might today call another teaching moment, something that is helpful. And I find his answer to be very interesting, and it's a very powerful answer. Jesus answered, "Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." Now, he's not saying that they never sinned. That would contradict the scriptures, for there's none righteous, no, not one. But what Jesus' answer is, there's nothing that the man did to be born blind. There's an infant, can't sin in the mother's womb. And so, there's nothing that the man did to be born blind. And there's nothing that his parents did. This is not some kind of payback. That's what we think sometimes. It's not some kind of consequence of something that his parents have done. And so as we look at that, the answer that sometimes we just need to hold to is the fact that these things happen. In a fallen world, in a sinful world, in a world where DNA and everything else is not what it needs to be. People have damaged DNA and hereditary problems, and it's passed on. There can be so many different reasons, but Jesus said it's nothing that either he nor his parents did. And so sometimes we just have to accept that as it is. Jesus did not try to find a specific blame for the reason. And I would think if anybody knew why this man was born blind and had a full explanation, he ought to be able to present that. But he uses that as an interesting thing because he goes on to say here that he was born blind for a purpose, a particular purpose, that the works of God should be manifest in him or made known. Sometimes we just don't really understand why things are the way they are. They just are. There may be an underlying reason, but it happened. It's there. But in this particular case, Jesus says that this man was born blind so that the works or the power of God might be made manifest through him. I believe that the Bible teaches that God is an all-knowing God, that he knows the beginning from the end and the end from the beginning, and so he understands all things. And so Jesus says, to be clear, this man was born blind for a specific reason, because I knew him, and I knew that one day I would restore his sight so as to bring glory to God the Father. Now, that's a pretty powerful explanation, because, most people would have difficulty accepting that. You mean to tell me that this man went through this much of his life, blind from birth, just so this moment could come to pass? And Jesus says yes. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but in this particular instance, there is a reason for it. And there was a reason for many of the sicknesses. And, God's answer to Paul in 2 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, is, above anything else, his strength is made perfect in weakness. When we are weak, we see the strength and the power of God. We rely upon God. We're led to walk closer with God when things are not so good. And when things are good, when we're strong and when we're whole, we don't many times spend any time thinking about what God has done. We ignore those blessings. So, Jesus tries to get them to understand that this is interesting. And so Jesus says, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. Jesus also teaches us something important here as we look at this. Every one of us have a very limited time here on earth. And in speaking toward Jesus, he had a very limited time on earth, and that time was quickly coming to an end. And one of the things he tells us is that when we have an opportunity to do good, to serve God, to make a difference, then we need to do that, because time is coming when, as he says, the night cometh when no man can work, can't do anything else. Once we pass from this life, we can't have much more influence on it. Our memory may inspire a person or two for a few years, but eventually we'll be lost to history and to time, and our memory will be gone. That's what I mean by lost. And so Jesus says, we have to do the right thing when we can, and when the opportunity presents it. And so he has to do that. For as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Of course, John speaks about this back in John, the 1st chapter, when he talks about that he came into the world, and talks about that back there. And so he speaks about the fact that he is the light of the world. John, in the early part there, talks about he's the creator. These miracles, and I call them miracles because they are miracles. These miracles, as I said, are creation miracles. They're miraculous. There's no explanation for it. This is an act of the miraculous. John later, toward the end of the book, will tell us that the things that Jesus did, there were many of those that nobody wrote down, but the ones especially that he wrote were done so that believing that we might have life through him, trying to get us to see who Jesus truly was. And so it says in verse 6, when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said unto him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing. Now, this is another one of those places where, Jesus did something that even today still agitates some people. There's some places where Jesus could just say, receive your sight, and they received their sight. There were places where, as we've seen before, someone's family member, servant, whatever, was sick, and they came to Jesus, and Jesus said, go home, they're fine. And Jesus healed them from a distance. But now we have this elaborate thing. He points out to the disciples, he uses it as a teaching moment, and then he goes to this whole thing and spitting on the ground and making clay, the mud, whatever from the ground, and then rubbing it on somebody's eyes. This drives some people crazy because they try to figure out, why he did this, and they want some kind of explanation as to why he did it. I think, the clearest, the best answer is we're going to find that when he did this was on a Sabbath day. And so on the one Sabbath day, he healed a man, and then he told him, take up your bed and walk. And that created a problem with the Pharisees and religious leaders. And I know this sounds crazy, but you'll just have to take my word or Google it. But by Jesus spitting on the ground and making clay and anointing the man's eyes, he was working on the Sabbath day. I mean, he was producing something on the Sabbath day. Now, if I was blind, I'd want to see. And if it took spitting on the ground, making clay or mud and rubbing my eyes and then go wash, if that's what it took. People have been known to do crazier things to get their sight. But some people try to find some explanation that there was some healing power in the dirt. There was some mineral. There was something there. It's a miracle. It doesn't matter about the clay, and it doesn't matter about the spittle, even though for us that seems like it would be a bad deal. But for the man, he saw, he regained his eyesight. But that has more to do with the fact that Jesus was working on the Sabbath day. Now I know that you're going to say, well, that doesn't. That sure doesn't look like work. Well, if you take a little bit of water and a little bit of dirt and make a little bit of clay, what's the difference in taking a little bit of water and a little bit of dirt and making clay, and taking a little bit more water and a little bit more dirt and making a brick? Or taking a little bit more water and a little bit more dirt and making several bricks? I know it seems like an endless argument, but that's the way it is. What is the true difference? And the true difference is, you're making something, you're producing something. And so Jesus was working on the Sabbath day. And that's why the man was not an invalid, so Jesus couldn't say, take up thy bed and walk. He didn't have a bed, and he didn't have probably a trade because, he probably was begging because he was blind. And so Jesus is a person who, knowing the Pharisees and knowing the argument that he's just had up in the temple and all, so he purposely does something to Healing on the Sabbath, that was bad enough, but Jesus purposely does something here that when the Pharisees hear about it, is going to raise their blood pressure. And so that's what it's about. Healing the man is only part of this. That shows the glory of God. That shows the power of God. That shows that the things that Jesus was doing were supported by God. But making clay out of the spittle, that's to put himself again in a position to be at odds with the Pharisees, to see what they're going to do about this. We have a man born blind who receives his sight. And we have Jesus making clay and anointing his eyes on the Sabbath day. And so what are you going to do with that? And so what will the Pharisees do with this? And so he creates, in essence, a dilemma, because he knows that eventually the religious leaders and the Pharisees are going to hear about this. It just has to happen, because people are going to see him and say, hey, aren't you Fred? The guy who sits over there for the last 10 years, 15 years. Aren't you Fred, the guy who's blind? How'd you get your eyesight back? And he's going to say, well, there was this guy, and he came along, and he made spittle out of clay and put it on my eyes and told me to go wash. And then those people are going to go and say, who I just saw down the street? I saw Fred. That guy was blind. He told me somebody made clay out of spittle, rubbed it on his eyes, and told him to go wash. And Fred can see now. And it just goes all over the place. People like to talk about things. It's the news. They may not have had Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and, all of that stuff, but I'll guarantee you that there was a network of people who interacted with each other. And just like today, they've got to be the first person to tell you this. You've met them. They get some little teeny thing, bit of knowledge, and they've got to go up and down the street, tell everybody before they know it. I've said for many years, I don't know why Lincoln County has a newspaper anyway, because by the time it reaches the people who read it, they already know everything that's in it, because everybody's done told everybody, and they've tweeted and posted and all. It's just human nature. When you get a good, juicy piece of gossip, you got to share it. And sooner or later, it's going to, again, fall in the ears of some of the cronies who are trying to put themselves in a good position with the Pharisees. And so it's just going to get out eventually. And so he went and he washed and he came back seeing. That is, he came back to where he had been and he could see. He came back seeing. He went by memory to where things were. Blind people can navigate very good because they know how many steps it is to this, and to make a right or a left and go so far, and there's that this, that, there's a tree. They learn to navigate in their surroundings quite well. So he knew how to navigate to where he needed to be, and he came back, though, seeing. The neighbors, here we go. The neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him, that he was blind, said, is not this he that sat and begged? So he really doesn't have any occupation other than beggar. He would sit and beg, and people would give him money. And I'm sure that many good-hearted, good-spirited people made provisions for him, that when they passed by, they would put a coin, whatever that was, in his cup, his dish, whatever that he had there, to help support him. A good deed. The Jewish people would call it a mitzvah. It's a good deed. And so as we look at this, the neighbors and people who see him, and I have no idea what his name was. Fred's the easiest thing for me to remember, but, they see good old Fred. This is a guy that they've been given a coin to. So now one or two things has to be right. Either he was blind and he's now received his sight, or Fred's been one of the best actors they've ever seen, because he's took them for a small fortune over the years as they have give him donations and have give alms to him, believing that he is blind. And so the neighbors began to talk about it. They start saying, is that him? Is that not him? Some said, this is he. Others said, it is like him. But he said, I am he. When one is in a position to, again, be subject to begging and all those things, your facial structures, slumping over, there's no, real, I don't know if you want to call it pride or whatever you want to call, but, there's a lot of dependency. And so one is very meek and lowly and humble. And now they see Fred, and, he's walking taller and he's looking better and he's smiling, and, he's, me, I'd be jumping up and down and, just twisting and turning and flipping upside down, looking at every leaf and everything that I'd never seen before. Everything would be brand new. And some people couldn't believe it was him. They just said it's a man who looks like him. And while they were busy debating, what he was doing and what they were seeing, he said, that's me. I'm the Fred. I'm the guy who you saw down the street every day. Some continued, therefore, and say unto him, how were thy eyes opened? Here we go. They only have half the story. He was blind, and now he can see. But exactly how did that happen? What good fortune has befallen you that now you can see? He answered and said, a man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. They said unto him, where is he? He said, I know not. If Jesus was standing right there, would he have known him? He couldn't. He only knew the sound of his voice. He knew his name, but he'd never seen anybody before. He's matching sounds to faces and those kind of things. Do you have something you want to say? No. Okay. But, as he's doing that, he said, where is he? Well, Jesus told him to go wash, and he washed and came back. But when he came back, apparently Jesus was gone. He knew his name, and I'm sure he knew that because he heard people. I doubt he was the only person who was speaking about Jesus or looking for Jesus. And so he knew who he was, but where he went, he has no idea. And it's interesting, verse 13, they brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind. And it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Notice John makes the point of saying it was the Sabbath day when he made, M-A-D-E. M-A-D-E equals W-O-R-K. Have to think about it that way. He made something as small and insignificant as it may seem to us. MADE equals WORK. And so, since this is a miracle, they bring him to the Pharisees and they want to show them what it is that has happened. And again, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said unto them, He put clay upon my eyes, and I washed, and do see. So we have that. And so he gives, John at least gives us an abbreviated count. He may have spoke a little more, but that's the gist of it. Therefore, said some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was division among them. This is what Jesus wanted. He wants this whole process to fall in the lap of the Pharisees. He's not even there, and he's there. He's not in their physical presence, but he is taking up their time, efforts, energy, thoughts. So this man is seeing, and it's a bad day for the Pharisees, because how are we going to explain this? This is just more problems, because people are going to want to believe on Jesus because this man can see. And so they speak to the man, because after all, he was a blind man, he was a beggar, in their eyes, he's a bum. And so, they determine that they're just going to tell him, what it is. And therefore they said, this man is not of God, speaking about Jesus, not the man who received his sight. And they explain why to this man. He's not of God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. He's out there doing these kind of things on the Sabbath day when he should be resting and keeping the law of Moses as it says.
I got one now.
Do what?
You got a short memory.
The Pharisee?
Where Jesus left the guy and told him to take up his bed.
Yeah.
They got a short memory.
You got pretty much the same thing as back at the pool of Bethesda when Jesus told that person to take up their bed and walk. That was on a Sabbath.
Yeah.
Jesus could have done it on a Monday. He could have done it on a Friday. You've got to ask yourself, why is Jesus doing this, and especially on the Sabbath day? He seems to be wanting to be controversial. He seems to keep wanting to stir up trouble. But again, this is the way people will take things and discuss things and divide up over things, because it's an issue. It's not just about the healing, it's about the Sabbath and whether Jesus is from God, and it brings up all these questions. And so, there's this division, and that's, Jesus wanted this discussion, and he has it going. One group says that this man is not from God because somebody from God wouldn't be telling you to do things and wouldn't be doing the things that he's doing on the Sabbath. But then others, on the other hand, say, how can this man not be from God, seeing how the miracles which he does? And there was a division, there was a dividing among them. And so they have to, again, weigh these things. What does this mean? If he is from God, then it wouldn't be a bad thing then for him to do what he did. And we ought to rejoice in the fact that this man who was blind can now see. But again, if he's not from God, then this man has sinned, and then he's doing all these terrible things out there. And it's hard to explain how somebody seeing someone receiving their sight on the Sabbath day or any day is a bad thing, and anybody who could do that. And so this is something that probably filled the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the religious leaders and the people. They're all trying to figure this out. And so this one incident becomes a newsworthy event that gets probably spread across and around Jerusalem until we can get back to that. And so our time is up for this morning.
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.